Warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and welcome back here to Salam Media, your humanitarian journalism portal. My name is Ahmed Kajee, and this is Local Matters. We are together until 9 p.m. this evening. As you know, this show is all about information and matters regarding the local government elections, which is taking place on the 4th of November 2026. Over the past few weeks, we have been speaking to various mayoral candidates, councillor hopefuls, NGOs, NPOs, and everyone else who does have a vested interest with regards to the local government elections. And this evening is no different. We have spoken to various mayoral candidates before this, and this evening is no different. Tonight, we are joined by the EFF's Johannesburg mayoral candidate, Dr Tlaleng Mofokeng. She has been part of the EFF for the last few years now, has been a big part of the recent election manifestos from 2024, and obviously through 2026. She has experience in the medical fraternity with regards to much of her career being spent in work within HIV/AIDS, reproductive health, gender equality, and access to healthcare. So a big part of that involves basic access to basic human rights. That's one of the few things which Dr. Tlaleng has been a part of as well. But she is up against many more people, many more political parties who have a bit more experience in this metro, in the city of Johannesburg, with the likes of Helen Zille and Herman Mashaba, who have been mayors in their respective cities, Herman Mashaba being in Johannesburg as well. But that's just a breakdown of some of the things we will be discussing this evening. Dr. Tlaleng, we'd like to thank you very much for joining us here on Salam Media. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good evening, and thanks for having me.
So I'd like to think I've covered up just the basic summation of a lot of the work which you have done, but I guess a big part of what you are doing is running for mayor of Johannesburg. What is your overall vision for Johannesburg? And I guess firstly, why should somebody be voting for you?
So the proposition is quite simple. It's that you are being asked by the economic freedom fighters to choose yourself this coming 4th of November. And by that, we mean to center your own dignity in how, as a resident of Johannesburg, you can choose a political party that's going to center your needs, that's going to center the way in which dignity for human development, for the health of the environment is important for all of us. And what we want to do, and through my mayorship, is give people an understanding that we can create a Johannesburg that is thriving. And that means there are structural ways in which Johannesburg has to be expansive, in which its own resources have to be managed better and well for the well-being of everyone in it. And also that we know that the policies and the bylaws often inform a lot of regulation. And we want to move from a space where Johannesburg is only felt by its residents through regulation and administration, but through a partnership with the EFF and through my mayorship, you as a citizen and your dignity matters, because collaborations and partnerships will be important to us. I'm going to foster new kinds of relating. A lot of us in Johannesburg are bonding over lack of water. I drove here on the M1, completely dark, for kilometers on end. We are bonding over how unsafe our streets are and how our children have no recreational spaces. And what the EFF wants to do is center not just only a conducive environment for business, which is a lot of what other political parties have done before, but we also want to center the fact that as a citizen and a resident of Johannesburg, you have a right to not just only participate in the politics, but socially, politically, economically, and culturally as well. And that takes all of us being Johannesburg in a particular way every single day, making individual decisions on our own responsibility as citizens. And so electing me as mayor is someone who understands both the structural ways in which your work has to be created by all of us, but more specifically, as a mayor who have delegated powers, I will make sure that Johannesburg is a space where its children, its youth, its elderly, women, LGBTQ plus persons, people with disabilities are not an afterthought, but they are a central part of how we plan for the city, how we mobilize resources for the city. In a nutshell, I'm asking the citizens of Johannesburg to vote for me because they are voting for dignity and they are betting on themselves for the first time on a ballot.
I'm going to bring it back to some of your experience. I think we have a basic understanding of what your vision now is for the city of Johannesburg under your prospective mayorship as well. I mean, that would mean the EFF getting a 50+1% voting success on that front. But if we needed to speak to who you are, a health expert with experience in GBV, but across the board, it was mainly focused around health. Moving now towards a multi-billion rand budget, such as the city of Johannesburg, what do you think qualifies you as someone who has a health policy expert to now perhaps actually run a complex metro, especially one like Johannesburg, where it's infrastructure maintenance, so there's historic issues to sort out and current maintenance, and then also future-proofing the city as well?
So I've also ran, by the way, in my 20s as a young medical doctor. I've ran 4 mining clinics in the West End of Johannesburg in a gold mine. And as you can understand, how many workers one is in charge of, how many mine shafts one is in charge of, and the kinds of health systems management that's required to be able to run 4 mining clinics in a gold mine in Johannesburg in the West End in my 20s at the time. And of course, evolving as a young 30-year-old who's been involved in policy making in the Department of Social Development, for example, and at our Population Development Chief Directorate, looking at, youth led programs, but also doing policy specific around HIV management and prevention and sexual and reproductive health rights. And actually, in my late 20s, almost into the early 30s, having very key for the HIV program for Gauteng as a province, where we're doing HIV prevention, strategic health communications, in charge of literally crafting the language around, and I think all of us, maybe I'm too old now, but we have a memory of how even the language around HIV communication and prevention actually changed. And I was one of the people in the forefront of that kind of change. Also then having, of course, to manage my own franchises of medical practices as a general practitioner then in 4 different localities in Johannesburg, in the different regions of the metropolitan city. And also then, of course, being at the United Nations and doing multilateral work for the last 10 years, but more specifically as someone who had to answer and support and collaborate and coordinate work with 193 member states. I don't think that is a small task to do. And I think because I'm actually only now still 44, which means I was doing diplomatic work in my early 30s already. And that experience of doing work with 193 member states, that's 193 countries. I think Johannesburg has everything to gain with that kind of experience that I bring, and basically nothing to lose, because when you look back at some of these mayoral candidates I'm up against, they're well past retirement age. They're completely tired and exhausted. They are power hungry. Some of them quit when they were mayors of Johannesburg. Others lied in deceit and then told us that they moved to Johannesburg in January just to stand for mayorship. Bunch of power hungry old people who are completely tired and wrung out. And I'm saying bet on someone who firstly understands the nostalgia of a Johannesburg that used to work. I've been living here for 18 years. I'm saying bet on someone who's a great manager of resources, who actually did incredible work as an activist, advocate for human rights. My work has never been funded. I've always done everything that I have with my own resources, right?
So sorry to interject, Dr. Tlaleng.
No,
I know you've spoken in detail about what vision you have for the city of Johannesburg, also with your perceived shortcomings that other mayoral candidates do have, and what sets you apart from them. But in terms of your impressive CV in the health sector as well, running the city of Johannesburg involves dealing with entities such as Eskom, Johannesburg Water, the electricity department, dealing with management of infrastructure, and then also navigating the relationships between provincial government and potentially political coalitions. But even if we have to just keep it to a national government relationship between national government, provincial government, and the city of Johannesburg, how do you manage those particular relationships from perhaps the place of a health expert, and perhaps now that you're moving beyond health policy, it's also moving into the political space?
Yeah, so I've worked in health policy, I've worked in peace and security issues, I've worked in health systems management, I've actually have a postgrad in health economics and politics and management, and all of those things are important. But what's really key for Johannesburg, for people to understand, is that there is a cultural shift that is required for the city to succeed. Doing more of what previous mayors have done is not going to get us the Johannesburg we deserve. What we need is to actually set a new tone of how we relate with each other. For example, all of us are concerned by the city's employees. We want them to be, motivated. We want them to do the best they can. But what's important is that we don't want them to be corrupt. We need to remove this expectation and this preparedness that even as citizens we have for corruption and bribery at every single point of service that we meet any city entity or, service providers. We need to ensure that even, for example, the city is engaged in a lot of CCMA cases, a lot of litigation, all of them pointing to managers who are unable to actually bring stakeholders around the table, which is a strong point that I have. A lot of what I've had to negotiate at the multilateral space, at the diplomatic space, is precisely bringing stakeholders around the table, firstly, who are fighting, who are literally dropping bombs on each other, and thirdly, who don't think any of the problems have anything to do with them. And I'm saying that skill, that global skill of being a peace negotiator, of being a multilateral negotiator, can absolutely benefit Johannesburg. If you think about the kinds of, and you spoke about the Joburg's entities, which are fair enough. We haven't even talked about the CCMA. We haven't even discussed the unions, right? And the abrasive negative relationship that many of those entities have with the city's entities and management. And so we need to change that, because for the city to thrive, there is a framework of engagement. There's a renegotiation that has to happen, even with our own service providers in the city, even with the residents, right? And all of us immediately think billings, right? We know that's like one of the biggest spaces where citizens are frustrated, where a renegotiation has to happen, but the trust has to be built. Because if you cannot explain to citizens why particular decisions are being made or not in a particular way, you can has been stripped away for so long. And so for me, it is about really not just politically what the EFF stands for, which is about centering dignity, but it's about the process itself. It's as important as the outcome. And for far too long, we are chasing particular outcomes, which in many instances, corrupt ways and corrupt methods are actually utilized to get to particular outcomes. So we need to pay attention to also the process as much as it is the outcome. And remember, as the mayor, you have particular powers and delegation authority. Those entities exist and they are run by CEOs. I'm not supposed to pick it up. That's not my expectation as any mayor. Never mind one of City of Johannesburg. And we have a lot more entities than even compared to Cape Town, for example. What we need to embark on is to see, is investment in all of these CEOs, in all of these entities actually efficient in the literal sense, in that are we able to do service delivery, which is our core as a city? And are we able to then make sure that we have the competent people in those seats and not have, almost like these privatized way of running the city? And many of the people I'm competing with on the ballot, unfortunately, are pushing for privatization, which will further, curtail our rights to basic, services.
Perfectly understood on that front. And we will be continuing this conversation in the next segment as well. We are going to go for a short break. It is 10 minutes to 8 p.m. Central African time on Salam Media. When we come back to Dr. Mofokeng, we will be speaking a bit more about the practical implementations of some of the service delivery issues and some of the things which you are hoping to implement as the Mayor of Johannesburg. So we will be continuing that conversation after this ad break. To our listeners and to our viewers here of Salam Media, please stay tuned here to Local Matters with myself, Ahmed Kajee. We will be back after this short break, and we are together until 9 p.m. this evening.
Shimmer, sparkle, captivate. Nothing less than a masterpiece. Droplets of gold inspires precious design. Platinum bursts with intricate freshness, and every pure diamond becomes more than just a girl's best friend. Voda Gold Gem Jewelers, where timeless dreams become a reality. Come to us. We tailor-make designer gold, platinum, and diamond jewelry. Trade in or remodel your old gold. Clad yourself with classy name-branded watches. We offer insurance valuation and freezer card calculation. Visit us at 534 Ridge Road, Overport, or call 031 208 9142. Voda Gold Gem Jewelers, manufacturers of fine gold and diamond jewelry.
World-class financial services only at Sapphire Global, your financial partner. If you are looking for Islamic, Sharia, and ethical financial products, look no further. Sapphire Global offers a wide range of financial service offerings, from short-term to life and investments. A full-service center with all financial requirements under one brand. Our highly skilled and experienced consultants are ready to help protect your financial future. Contact us on 041 001 0184 or visit our website on www.sapphireglobalfs.com. Sapphire Global is an authorized financial services provider.
More than 800 million people around the world live in deep poverty, uncertain of where the next meal will come from. For those on the brink of dignity and hope, send food, send kindness. Be the reason a family does not go hungry. Donate now to Islamic Relief.
Hey Gulam.
Yeah?
Did I return your lawnmower last month?
No, bye, you didn't.
Oh no. Now what'll I do? I wanted to borrow it again, man.
With Randry Jewelers, you won't have to borrow or lend because the prices are so well trimmed on all gold and diamond jewelry. Alternatively, we could remake your old jewelry into a brilliant new design. Visit Randry Jewelers at 151 Stevens Lamini Road, Musgrave, Durban. Randry Jewelers, the family name you can trust.
Gaza needs your support more than ever. Homes have been shattered and families have lost everything. With your support, our teams are delivering clean water tankers, feeding the hungry, and assisting orphans who have no one left. Let us give Gaza whatever help we can. African Muslims Agency, empowering, educating, inspiring.
Listen to something fresh. Listen to Salam Media, your humanitarian broadcaster.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and good evening. Welcome back to Salam Media. This is Local Matters with myself, Ahmed Kajee. We are together until 9 p.m. this evening. We are in conversation with Dr. Tlaleng Mofokeng, the mayoral candidate for Johannesburg from the Economic Freedom Fighters. Dr. Tlaleng, thank you very much again for joining us. We are continuing our conversation around your views around what your plans are for the city, what you feel is the current issues facing the city, and what you would like to perhaps improve should you be elected as mayor as well. But moving on to the current issues which the city is facing, you have criticized the city's coalition politics, but the main issue I'd like to raise with you is basic services are compromised at the moment in the city, for the lack of a better word. Potholes, water, electricity, maintenance of the maintenance of infrastructure. Where do you stand on those particular issues? And if you were to come in as mayor, how would you fix those? And perhaps in the more practical terms, what would that mean from a financial point of view and then from a rollout point of view as well?
Yeah, I don't think anyone can argue that we need actually consistent access to water, but also potable water and sanitation. Mm-hmm. Not just access to food, but nutritious food. And that must be on a sustained scale, because it also not just impacts, growth and development, but even people who are ill with chronic illness need, nutritious food. You need, of course, the consistent supply of energy, because if you want to transform the local economic development sector, you cannot do that if, as an industry player, as an entrepreneur, even as a private chef, you are unable to actually do your work and meet your own outputs for your own, not just industry, but also your own, economic activity. We need spaces that are not just safe and conducive for big business, but we also have to look about the informal sector and the informal economy, because they too are important players of the actual economy as well. What we need, for example, in the transport hubs, and I met with the members of the taxi associations and the marshals and the informal traders at Taxi Rank, for example, is that not only do we need more space, right, to expand these major transport hubs in and out of the city of Johannesburg, but we also need to think about how those spaces and those precincts themselves should form part of bigger development, and how then you want to expand by giving those people proper water, Bree taxi rank, for example, is so unsafe. There are no lights.
I'm
There's just a
gonna interject
microcosm.
again. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm going to interject again, Dr. Mofokeng. Just to find out. I mean, you've mentioned in detail the major issues which are facing the city, and I don't disagree with you on that front. I think the big thing which is important for our listeners to know is how would you change?
No, but
that
that's why I'm giving you an example of Bree, because a lot of people don't even think that even matters. All right, and why I'm speaking specifically about Bree and showing you the links between why Johannesburg cannot just give water and electricity to Bree. There's a whole expansion program that needs to happen just to that one precinct, right? At the moment, it's just the transport hub, but I'm even using words like a precinct, which means there's a kind of development idea and an agenda that has to be specific for a space such as Bree taxi rank, for example, which a lot of people just look upon as just, it's just some corner that always has litter, that always, the lights aren't working or there's water spilling everywhere. But that's a microcosm of what happens everywhere around the city of Johannesburg. Even class can no longer protect citizens of Johannesburg, because even in the so-called middle class areas, in the so-called suburbs, the electricity is not there. The streets are dark. Many of those communities have gated themselves into mini estates. They have outsourced their security to private companies. And so what we need as a city is to respect the fact that we are developmental by nature. Local government means that where the rubber meets the tar, I often say, that's how scopic we need to be in terms of understanding the problems. But how we're going to solve them is going to mean that, for example, a lot of the youth need far more recreational facilities, far more culture and sports activities, even those who are out of school, because if you focus only on those in school, you're also going to leave youth behind. What does that mean as a mayor, for example, for me, is thinking about the forums that I will be starting and running myself, where I will have to mobilize resources, stop the eventing and the unending golf days that Johannesburg hosts, and actually start putting those resources into actual important programs for youth, for example. We need to think differently about how we have collaborations between provincial and national government, but also other entities of the city as well. There's a lot of businesses who will not put money back and reinvest in the city simply because of corruption. So ending corruption in Johannesburg is one major issue that we need to do, because it will unlock funds that are already budgeted for, already allocated for certain programs, which are not yielding the outcomes for the city simply because of corruption. And you have to have consequence management for all of the entities, for all of the different administrators and managers who do not do their job by when it's supposed to be done. And I think one thing all of us have normalized is this idea that, we start a project today, we don't know the timeline for the project, but it's called, a multi-million-dollar renewal project for Johannesburg. With which time frame, and how do we measure key performances, right? And so for me, transparency, as much as it's not an end point, it's a practice that we have to embed in the city's programs. A lot of what the city gets from the treasury is still not enough for Johannesburg. And so if you think about human settlement, we have to prioritize people who are already left behind, right? What does that mean? It means that we have to look at RDP houses and remove corruption from there. We have to make those services seamless so that a go-go is no longer firstly, one government department will have understood that she's indigent, she needs a grant because of age and maybe other socioeconomic circumstances, maybe have a disability or a chronic medical illness like epilepsy. Why must that person still be expected to go queue and beg the municipality not to cut off their electricity? So the approach to that, for example, as the EFF, is to say, when a person has already been determined to be indigent, their water and light tariffs have to respond and to be adjusted accordingly, so that it's not the same go-go again who must still go beg the municipality for a fair meter reading, for a fair billing for her bill for electricity. So it's more than just about, yes, we agree there's problems, but there's a process and a value system that we need to re-inject into the city. Again, why dignity matters? It's precisely because many people in our residence are spending so much time moving from one office to the other office to prove to the other office they have an address that's given by the other municipal entity, running back to beg the other entity not to cut off their services. So a one-stop shop in the first 100 days is something that's tangible, that's going to immediately uplift and actually take away a lot of time being wasted by residents trying to reach us for services.
Perfectly understood on that front. I'm going to link to one particular example, and it's something you mentioned at the start of the interview. And perhaps what I am trying to find out is just the how this gets done. Is you spoke about coming into the studio down the M1 and the highway lights weren't on, you drove down in darkness, right? If you were mayor tomorrow, how would you fund repairs to make sure that those lights are turned on, and where would that money come from? Because budgets would need to be reallocated in some way or form. What would be your how?
No,
if we needed to
there's
use
no
that
budget
money?
that must be reallocated for lights to be on in Johannesburg. This city of Johannesburg has a budget that is allocated for it, for operational costs, for maintenance, for projects and programs and all of those things. The question we must be asking as Joburgers is, why is that money that is already being put down for lights is not going to lights? And a lot of people will just accept, of course, copper gets stolen. That's what a lot of the political reasons have been for the last 15, if not 20 years now. So why are we still not getting on top of that, right? So we have to see that the lights not being on is not more than, it's a lot more than just is the infrastructure there. On the M1, for example, we know the infrastructure there. If we need more visible policing, the question is, why have the JMPD not hired more policing? Lucky for us, public safety.
I guess the question I'm trying to ask Dr. Mofokeng is, what would you do to correct that?
But that's the thing, is that we have to sit and say, is it a problem of public security where we need to actually protect our infrastructure more? In which case we need more JMPD on the ground, because we know visible policing deters crime. If the issue is that the managers of city power are not doing their job, there has to be consequence management for that. If it is that there is not enough money to keep the lights on for 365 days a year, 24 hours a day, we need to ask our questions. Who are the high consumers of electricity in Johannesburg? Are they being billed high enough to provide them industrial level power, for example, so that you are not having these so-called power outages that are planned, in inverted commas, to avoid the terms load shedding, so that we are transparent with the communities to say, this is why in your area at this point, let's say Friday, there'll be maintenance from 4 to 6. People can actually trust that it's maintenance and not just think, they are lying about load shedding again. So it could be a variety of reasons why there are no lights on the M1, right? But there isn't a scarcity in the ways that we are being made to believe, right? By those, of course, who support privatization, who support capitalistic extractive activities. And we know Johannesburg is a lot of industry. If those industries are stealing residential power and resources to a point where we have normalized that there is no power, there's no electricity, it is a problem. What we need is to have the agility to change and rezone specific areas for business, so that we can then bill and record people as business consumers and charge them according tariffs. That way we can build more power capacity to generate, and where we can save power, let's do it. So it's more than just about put on the lights or just, put more on the grid. It's about actually expanding how we think about electricity. And truly, I understand that it's more than just one problem. And maybe it is that the robots don't work because copper is being stolen. But if that's the case, how are we having a conversation with public safety? How are we having a conversation with SAPS? Because as the mayor, I'm not in charge of the South African police, right? It's on my competency. So how are we, and that's why I'm saying my advocacy skills must benefit the residents of Johannesburg, bringing stakeholders around the table to show them that when SAPS fail to be visible where they need to be, when SAPS, Matlanga Commission, when all of that is going on, does the president understand the impact of the Matlanga findings in the city of Johannesburg? Has our mayor had that conversation with his own comrade, who are both ANC? Your mayor is not having those conversations. He's not holding the national executive accountable for how their failures at governance at the national level affect you and I every single day as citizens in Joburg. And those automatically become what? Joburg failures. And I'm saying it's not just Joburg failures. We have to look, and where the advocacy is required, where the activism is required, where a fight on behalf of Johannesburg is required, I'm happy and willing to do that. And that's how we actually will turn this city around.
Yeah. So you've spoken, it seems that stakeholder relations and getting people around the table is a big part of what you're planning on doing should you be elected as mayor. But recently you've just spoken now around resources and what exactly that means for the city, and perhaps, whether there's too much demand on whether it be electricity or too much demand on water or too much demand on housing. There's also then the aspect of what we have seen. There's been March on March, not just in Johannesburg, but that's been across the country as well. The big debate around that was whether, does immigration have any involvement in that? Perhaps your view on immigration, a big part of some of the mayoral candidates who are running for mayor have either been, pro-legal, it's been a situation around illegal undocumented foreign nationals in Johannesburg welcome? Is it a case of we should only be allowing documented foreign nationals to work? Where exactly do you stand?
Where did
on
they
that
study immigration and policing and border management, those mayoral candidates? I would like to know, just as an interesting question, because that is definitely not the competency of a mayor to enforce immigration laws. And I will not be doing that as the mayor of Johannesburg. What I will be doing is enforcing the bylaws of the city equally without fear or favor, regardless of who you are. Even South Africans are doing crime. Even South Africans are doing things they should not be doing. Madlanga Commission, I've never seen one person sit there who's a foreign national or so-called undocumented person. So the crisis that we have in this country cannot be relegated to the 1% of the population in this country. Completely reject the idea that fellow Africans, because this is about Afrophobia. I have not seen an East European, I've not seen an American, a European person, or even an Asian person who's been repatriated out of this country because of those kinds of activities that you speak of. I'm not running on, and the EFF is not running on a ticket that says it's going to be Afrophobic or hate or unleash violence on any citizen. We are saying that there are ways at the national level where this lies at the competency. Department of Home Affairs, Border Management Authority, call them in and ask them those questions about why they are not doing their job. And that's an exact example of why a national failure becomes a local municipality frustration. But the power and the delegated authority does not lie with the mayor to enforce immigration laws. We will be stuck in litigation for a very long time if people are expecting that the mayor of Johannesburg is going to enforce immigration. I'm a human rights advocate. I've been working in human rights all my life. I will not be a mayor that enforces inhumane and unleashes violence on other Africans. That is not going to happen under the EFF. We will, though, hold, like I said, the provincial leadership accountable, SAPS accountable, because they also work with immigration, and they have their role to play, with crime and prevention and response, and then, of course, the justice system. But Border Management Authority, for example, very, very key and very important as a stakeholder. Again, for those people to understand when they fail, when there's corruption, how that affects the city of Johannesburg. And that's why I take my role to advocate on behalf of Johannesburg very seriously, because I'm very aware and I respect the powers that the mayor has. I will not be embarking on a mayorship that entangles all of us in more and more litigation than we've never seen before. As capitalists are, and a lot of those mayor candidates are capitalists, they are then telling us that they're going to privatize our lives, privatize our human rights to respond to what they call efficiency gaps, when all, in fact, what they're trying to do is just loot the state more and create conditions where there'll be no accountability, because they know Johannesburg cannot afford to hold the very entities that they want to bring in as private sector to account when they are themselves leading in corruption. So we have to be very smart that we are not being pushed in a corner where we are othering each other, where we see each other as enemies by purely being human and sharing a space together. If it's not based on migration status and documentation status, next it's going to be discrimination based on age. Next, we are going to allow it based on religion. Next, we'll allow it based on sexual orientation and gender identity, all of which are already human rights principles, and you are prohibited from discriminating at someone simply because of migration status. So it's a very slippery slope, and based on our constitution, we cannot regress in terms of our human rights standing, and we will not become a city that is specifically Afrophobic, and not just xenophobic, but it's a specific hate for other fellow Black Africans. And as a mayor, I will not be participating in that kind of rhetoric and violence.
I think on a recent interview you done on Metro FM, there was, I guess, some discourse on social media around some of the comments which you had mentioned, and perhaps you can clarify anything. And I guess the question around this is if you could maybe just let me know what your intention was around that, and if you would like to clarify anything. So I think the comment which came out of that was, you said a human being cannot be described as illegal.
That's not a dramatic concept, guys. Right. That's very basic. The International Organization of Migration is very clear on how it gives a blueprint based on human rights frameworks, consensus documents, and very, very heavily negotiated text on how countries and member states of the UN are supposed to approach the issue of migration. Everyone and anyone is moving. Movement of people and persons is part of the human experience. I was born in Qwaqwa in 1982. I have since moved and traveled to Cape Town, to Northwest, to Limpopo, everywhere around the world. That is migration. that it's part of being a human experience. A lot of people are internally more moving in this country. If I had opportunities in Kwakwa that I have in Johannesburg, I wouldn't have moved here 18 years ago as a junior doctor. I would have stayed in Kwakwa in Free State if I had the opportunities there. So moving is part of being a human and part of human experience. We cannot vilify other people or unleash violence on other people because their context is in a particular way. We know, guys, that the corruption at Home Affairs, even for us as South Africans, is rife. We know the corruption, even you now, when you want to pick up your license or your ID, there is a level of corruption that goes on and bribery that's expected. And that's why I started by saying, for us to thrive as a city, we are going to have to move from just individual hatred by looking at the systems that continue to fail, all of us, and create scarcity and create a condition where we start hunting each other down. The International Organization on Migration talks about no human can be illegal because part of the human rights is migration. There are countries that have laws and responsibilities and guidelines of how that goes. Here's the other thing that these people that you were referring to them earlier, they are asking even children for business visa. Right? They don't even know that there are all these categories of visas. There's categories of visas from a spousal way. There's visas that are pertaining to children specifically. There's visas that pertain to economic and business activity. There's visas that pertain, to just being a citizen and moving from one place. So there are so many categories, and that's why I said, which school of migration did they also go to qualify to be mayors who are going to be implementing immigration? So we have to really be very clear that we do not descend. We do not descend as a community, as citizens, as a city, to a space where it will be so much harder for many of us who are already sitting here, who are already illegal in our own countries. I'm sitting as a black child, a black woman in 1982, who was born in a country that made my existence in my own country illegal. So we need to think and ask, why has Home Affairs failed to document people? Why does Home Affairs still fail? And remember, these processes they've defined for themselves as a national department. Why have they failed? Minister who's in charge of Home Affairs was in charge of health for 10 years prior. He went to Home Affairs. He's come back to Department of Health. None of you are asking Minister Motsoaledi the questions that you are asking me as a mayor, which have nothing to do with me and my competency, right? Mm-hmm. So even in the media, we need to be honest about the agenda that we are falling into, which is a right-wing agenda in this country.
Sorry, Dr. Mofokeng, I'm going to have to interrupt you simply because we are running short on time. But I have two questions, and I'll need them very briefly answered. Firstly, many of our audiences kind of want to jump in with voting with their gut. So a big part of our audience is based on the Israel versus Palestine stance. I need that within 30 seconds, if you don't mind. And secondly, if you don't get your 50+1% coalition majority, which parties would you not get into a coalition with? Very briefly, please.
I'll start with the coalition one. It's very simple. 50+1 is what's necessary to get the city stable governance. If the EFF does not get the 50+1 it requires, it must negotiate. There's no other way of getting this city the way that it needs to thrive for everybody. So it will mean that we are going to center the people's needs and the people's dignity in all our negotiations. That will be the guiding force. And talking about gut, our gut has always taken us to the right space, and we are never fearful of negotiation, and we will certainly be negotiating very hard for the citizens of the city of Johannesburg. On the Palestine issue, I'm not sure what the question is, but I and the EFF continue to stand in unwavering solidarity with the Palestinian people, but all oppressed people around the world, those in Haiti, in Cuba, in Venezuela, those in Sudan and Congo. And we're absolutely very certain and very clear that the kind of politics that are happening in Johannesburg and the ways in people want to drag us into a space is very much a Zionist, racist space that serves the interests of a few capitalists who want to continue to extract from this country and its people and literally our bodies as labor because they don't see us as worthy. And so the same oppression that we stand in opposition around the world, we stand in that opposition in our own country, in our own city, and we remain unwavering. And we know that liberation will come for all of the people in the world. And I myself, by the way, am still embroiled in litigation and court cases because of the HPCSA and the fact that Zionists think they can silence every and anyone that they want to. And so even that work at the UN continues to follow me to this day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Dr. Mofokeng, thank you very much for your time. We could have this conversation going for another few minutes, but yeah, we are out of time, unfortunately. I'd just like to thank you for your time, for joining us this evening. And we're hoping this insight from your point of view will allow us, will at least allow the residents of Johannesburg to make an informed decision. At the end of the day, that's what this show is all about.
Absolutely.
Thank you for your time this evening.
4th of November.
That's Dr. Tlaleng Mofokeng joining us here in Johannesburg. She is the EFF's mayoral candidate, giving us some insightful, perhaps some insight into what their plans are for the city of Johannesburg should she be elected as mayor of Johannesburg. If you happen to miss this conversation, you can catch it on our podcast and as well as our website. It's just gone 8:15 here on Salam Media. Please stay tuned. We will be back after this short break.
Searching.